Our next speaker is Chris Chivers. Chris is immediate past president of Chartered Institute of Building. He's originally from a surveying background. Chris is now managing director of Greylough Ltd, specialists in problem solving, where his over 40 years experience in the construction industry provides effective solutions for corporate clients such as Jaguar Land Rover, Hampstead Theatre, developers such as Hadley Property Group, Quintain, Aquila Holdings and major contractors. Chris was also chief executive of Kilby and Gayford Group Limited. When I worked in the UK, Kilby's were one of our staunch competitors. So during that time he oversaw a number of landmark projects, not least of which was refurbishment works of Buckingham Palace, Downing Street and St Paul's Cathedral, and also major banking sector rollouts for clients such as NatWest, Barclays, Halifax and Lloyds TSB. He personally ensured the implementation of Kilby and Gayford's health and safety training and operational procedures. From 2010 to 2012, Chris was chairperson of the UK Contractors Group Training Committee. Currently is also a court assistant at the Worshipful Company of Joiners and Sealers, and of course a freeman of the City of London. I asked Chris to reflect on some broader international perspectives that are in the news and concern us as a construction industry. So he'd start off with Brexit and may venture into some other areas. Thank you, Chris.
Before I start, Martin, can I thank you for allowing me to come back again this year? I must have done something right, but I'm not sure what. And for those of you who weren't here last year, you'll find out in about 30 minutes. Also, what I'm about to tell you, I need to caveat by saying that actually they're my views. They're not the views of the CIOB, as far as I'm aware, or the Institute, or any other accredited body in any way, shape or form. Martin asked me to do this subject. I picked up on some research, and these are the conclusions I think I've found. So, and I can't promise this is going to be as interesting as fire engineering. June 23rd, that was a Thursday in 2016. And at 7 o'clock that morning, the polling stations opened, and the British public were going to vote to stay or leave inside the European Union. What were we voting on? Did we really know anything? I don't think we did. I think politicians spent a lot of their time politicking before the event. And for those of us who had the vote, we were going in with very little facts at all. We really didn't know what the intended outcome was going to be if we left. We knew what would happen if we stayed, more of the same. But we didn't know what was going to happen if we left. But when we walked into the polling stations on that day, 69% of us were unsure of what was going to happen. So there was a start. Most of the population didn't know what they were voting for. 44% thought that our influence would be unchanged. We'd still be okay in Europe and we'd still be okay with the rest of the world. Well, we're voting for change, but we're still hoping it's all going to stay the same. That's got an air of madness about it, but we thought that was okay. 40% thought the economy would be worse off. Could well be right. They had no clue, they had no statistics, no figures, no facts to back up that view. And 57% think immigration will be lower. Again, no facts to back up that view. They don't know what the border controls are going to be if we exit. We don't know yet. We still don't know from what the Prime Minister has said. So that's what we thought going in on the 23rd of June. The next day, what have we done? Well, that man there gambled and lost. That ended his political career. An avid Remainer, the Prime Minister. He was going to stay. The day after the vote went against him, he waved the white flag and stepped down from his job, so he wasn't going to remain in the job. And subsequently, he stepped out of politics altogether. That's how keen he was to remain. So not really left the British public with much enthusiasm for politicians' promises. It seems that, in the research I did, that wealthier households thought the economy would be worse and Britain would have less influence. So those who were better off thought things were going to change and get worse for them. Conversely, the poorer households thought there'd be no difference on the economy or Britain's future. None of those have got any real foundation. There's no facts to back up those views. That's just what we feel is going to happen after we voted to leave. Financial markets were expected to tumble. They were going to crash. The bottom was going to fall out of our financial world. And the UK economy was going to be hit hard. That was what happened that was the day after we voted to leave. That's what everybody said was going to happen. So why did we do it? You know, why would we vote for this change? Change for something that we didn't know anything what the real outcome was going to be. It's just change for change's sake. Well, apparently we said that we thought that the reduction in migrants claiming welfare benefits should be a real benefit if we step out of the EU. So that links in with the lower immigration thing, perhaps. That's why we said that. It was to stop other EU nationals getting their NHS treatment free. But not only EU nationals will get NHS treatment free, people get off the plane from lots of parts of the world and get NHS treatment free, because that's the system we run, rightly or wrongly, or perhaps stupidly or not. But that's what we do. So there's a structure around this. We wanted to reduce the European Union in regulating our companies and our businesses. People were getting fed up with the European Union, somebody in Brussels telling us what to do, unelected statesmen dictating how life would be for us in this country, in the UK, and perhaps here and other EU countries. People we never voted for telling us that these are the new rules. We wanted to end the ability of the EU to decide the number of hours to work. Well, why would we do that? There's an opt-out clause in the UK. I don't quite know how it's structured in Ireland, but it's a 48-week maximum. Unless you opt out, you can do 72 hours in a week. The reality of that is 72 hours a week is enough for anybody. So I don't quite know why people thought that that was a reason for voting out. Wanted to end the automatic rights of all EU citizens to live and work in Britain. I don't know what the problem is with that, but that's the result of the polls that were taken after the voting. That's what they said. They voted that way because they wanted to stop this. There is a theme coming here, and I'll show you in a moment where it is. And there was a general feeling that it was a gradual erosion of national identity. We weren't British anymore, we were just Europeans and an island off the coast of Europe that had to follow Europe's lead. And this is perhaps where we can pick up on the theme of how this happened. So who is it that actually voted in the UK for Brexit? Apparently, the majority of those in social housing, those in lower income bracket, people with less educational qualifications. The thing that's coming from this, it seems, is that the disenfranchised part of the population, the people who are less well off, the people who felt they were left behind, who weren't getting involved with what the government was supposed to be doing for them, they were left out on the side. Lots of areas of the UK where state-owned businesses are being closed down, coal mines and so on, gradually were being eroded, leaving people effectively on the scrap heap, or trying to find other work that they were uncomfortable with, or having to move home to go and find work. Bit of a standard trait in the construction industry, you have to move wherever the work is, but not everybody's used to that. white ethnic background. Men more than women. So it was white men that voted out. Don't quite know why that was. Should be the case. But that's what the polls found after the event. It's all got a bit of a mix-up in this process. There is a little bit of a trend, but not much. Red top readers, the red top papers, the power of the press, they were the ones that regularly read The Sun and The Mirror, and all those with the red tops. They were the people that listened to what the papers said. And more than often than not, didn't take account of what is purported to be factual accounts in the papers, but more likely to be the editorial comment from the newspaper editors themselves. They took that as being fact, they took that as being real, and they voted to leave. And conversely, people who were living well, which goes back to the point earlier on, they voted to remain. They didn't want to get out, their life was okay. So they're the people who voted for Brexit, along with 73% of the older working population. That makes up 16% of the total population. I hasten to add I wasn't one of those. I wanted to stay. But why would older people want to vote out? Fed up with somebody else telling them they knew a life before the EU. Just wanted to go back to it, perhaps. 75 of affluent Eurosceptics. Well, that's not a surprise, really. They're the people who said, actually, you know, we've had enough of this, it's time to get out. But they make up 23% of the population. But more importantly, this is going back to the trend. 95% of the economically deprived population voted to leave. So they didn't know what they were getting, but they were fed up with what they got. I think the real trend for this, for me, when I was doing the research, is that this shows that politicians generally spent too much time playing politics before the event and not actually engaging with the voting population, people who kept them in their jobs. People just felt as if they weren't being listened to. And I think this is the trend that comes through here. And it seems that that's happening around the world. And I'll come on a little bit more to that later. These people are a group who generally were politically disengaged. They're not part of any political party, but they were apparently buoyed up by the Brexiteers' rhetoric. All those people who wanted to leave suggested that, you know, this is the right thing to do, really pushed on with them, didn't tell them what the outcome was going to be, but said it's the right thing to get out. And they engaged with that, and they voted to leave. And there's another little split here. England and Wales clearly voted to leave. The big cities in England didn't. London, Cambridge, Oxford, wealthier parts of the country voted to remain. But around the rest of the populace outside the big cities all voted to leave. Common theme right across the UK, right across England. Wales en masse voted to leave. And Scotland, as perhaps everybody knows, that Scotland don't want to do anything that the rest of the UK want to do. And Northern Ireland voted to remain. And of course you would have heard some of that last week during the voting process up there in the north. So what's going to happen next? Well, it was confused when it started. It was confused the day after. And guess what? It's still confused. Nothing's changed. We still don't quite know. But here's some ideas. If I can get this moving. Yeah. Prime Minister has told us on January the 17th that we're definitely not going to remain in the single market. So that means we, according to the EU regs, we can't trade with them. But there are a couple of other things that we could do. There are going to be new migration controls. Okay, that sort of helps out with the process of people saying they want lower immigration and so on. But what are we doing in terms of migration controls? I've got some numbers to quote there. Why would we want to control migration? We're spending too much in keeping people who come into the country who don't put any taxes into our coffers. That's not true. We know most of the EU nationals come in and put money into the coffers, the tax coffers. We know a lot of them work for low wages, but they still pay their tax. So migration controls are going to do what? I think, from a personal perspective, I think they'll just be a bit of a whitewash. We'll have customs control and be tracking people, but they won't be able to come in en masse, but they'll still come in. The fate of EU citizens in the UK is unknown. We've got 3 million EU citizens in the UK, working and living in the UK, out of a population of 65 million. We'd be absolutely crazy to let them go home. That's when our economy is going to be hit. It's if we let that working populace leave the country. Because the reverse is true as well. We don't know what's going to happen to UK citizens around the rest of the EU. And when I say that, I'm not actually including Ireland, because we've always had a pretty special relationship between Ireland and the UK in terms of moving labour backwards and forwards. And it's never really been too much of a problem. Certainly all the years I've worked in construction, a significant amount of the labour force was Irish when I was a trainee. It's now either Polish or Romanian. And I have to say, on one project I'm working on at the moment, it's the first project I've worked on where the high-vis jackets have got the word interpreter across the back. But we can't do without them. In London and the South East, 25% of the working construction population are EU nationals. We'd be crazy to let those people go out of our construction industry. Britain will not be bound by the European Court of Justice. I think that really means, from what the Prime Minister's saying, is that we're going to make our own laws again. Hopefully she's right. Whether that actually appears that way in the end or it will manifest itself that way, I'm not sure. Again, these are the headlines. We haven't got all the facts. We don't know that actually we're going to make all our own laws and our Supreme Court are going to be the final arbiters of those processes. But of course there's a catch to this as well. All the time we're talking about getting out, we're still paying our bill. We've got to pay right until the time we leave in 2019. So we still really don't know what's going to happen. I spoke to a director of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Doesn't look like it's going to affect Western Europe too much if we leave the EU. It's certainly going to affect Eastern Europe, because they're the ones that are the recipients of most of the levy that we pay. They get most of the money that the wealthier countries put in. But doesn't that mean that most of them then will have to come out of their countries and go looking for work elsewhere? Won't they be coming west? Won't they be coming to Germany and France and the UK and Ireland to do their work? You have more than your fair share of immigrant labour over here, I know that. But what we heard this morning, it seems that your construction economy is on the up. Quite a considerable process. We could join EFTA or the EEA, so that's European Free Trade Association, or the European Economic Area. The EAA, that one there, is the process by which Norway operates. So Norway has the longest border within the EU with its neighbouring country, Sweden, and they have quite a good working relationship with the Swedes. In fact, I was listening to RTE1 this morning on the radio, and they were saying what a good process they've got. They've been doing it for 10 years, and actually it's not a problem. Last night on the TV, I noticed that the guy who was running the Dublin port was saying that if he's got to put a customs yard up, when the vehicles come off the ro-ros ships, the lorries will create a traffic jam 9 kilometres long each time. And he doesn't know where he's going to get the space at Dublin port to be able to do that. in living memory, as far as I'm concerned, I don't remember it being like that when there were customs before, but maybe there's just a lot more traffic coming through. Well, of course, we all know what happened in the USA. They decided they'd had enough of politicians telling them one thing and doing another, or not doing anything. Just being politicians and not listening to the people. Politicians we've had in the UK make a good living out of leaving the Prime Ministerial office and going off on a tour, doing speeches. Take note of this, Martin. They get paid extremely well for doing speeches. And I mean, likes of Tony Blair, he's earning fortunes doing the circuit. But he was the one that took us into war on a lie, because we followed the Americans and we believed what we were told without checking. David Cameron's not listened to the people. He's going to go off and do the circuit, purportedly. All this is got a bit of an air about it, really, in terms of the world's changing. It's about time politicians listen to the people. And that's where this seems to be running. Northern Ireland, bit of a change last week, wasn't there? There's no overriding power control there now. There's a bit more of a balance. The balance of power has shifted, and there's a scales there, and whether all the unionist parties join together and take power control remains to be seen. They're still in a state of flux. So that's politicians playing the game, but it seems in general they're not listening to the people, even though the people voted to tell them what they want. Now, I took quite some time to review the articles on the Institute of International and Economic Affairs, an Irish organisation. I thought I'd try and get a local flavour. And they've got all of this Brexit information down to a fine art. They know what all the problems are, they know what all the outcomes are going to be. God, I wish they was in the UK. I'd been on 23rd of June last year. Their guess that they put down as almost fact is just a guess. There's no guarantee that what they've stated is going to be an outcome. That's not the way things are panning out at the moment. But it's all doom and gloom. In the paper this morning, in this paper here, the Irish Independent, pretty regular paper, although it's got a bit of red on it. No, that can't be right. It's a normal paper, it's not a red top. The Irish Tourist Board said they want 12.5 million to combat the effect of Brexit, because they're saying tourism's going to be hit hard. Irish Ferries, on the other hand, a couple of pages on, have just announced their biggest profit return ever. They've had a stonking year, particularly since Brexit. So their traffic that they're moving, Irish Ferries, in terms of people and commercial traffic, is better than ever. And yet the Irish Tourist Board are saying, we need more money because this is all going to go wrong. Could be, just could be, that some people are using Brexit as the opportunity to cover up other shortcomings. But I'm guessing. I've got no proof of that. But my guess is as good as anybody else's, I think, so far from the research I've done. So who really does know what's going to happen next? Don't think anybody does. Sorry, in answer to that. Let me go back one. I don't think what I've tried to tell you there is that anybody really knows. It's all guesswork. It's all maybe, could be, might happen. We haven't got the facts. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. If we end up in EFTA, we mentioned earlier on there, that means that Labour can travel freely across the European Union. So we're back where we started from in terms of Labour. That's not a problem. Solves the problem of EU nationals in the UK, solves the problems of UK citizens in the EU. Not a problem. If we get into EAA and work the same way as Norway, they've been doing it for 10 years, hasn't affected them at all. There was the chap in the customs, Dublin port was talking about the customs exchange and the VAT, and how £200 goods will become £270 by the time you've added VAT and other tax on. He doesn't know that. He's doing what Ben described earlier on. He's scaremongering. He doesn't know that's going to happen. So all of this information could be what President Trump regularly says is fake news. It's just fake news. It's just something to say. It's just hot air. And I just put it to you that it's very difficult to assess exactly what the outcome of this is going to be, because not all the facts have been put on the table, and quite frankly, from the research I've done, I don't think people know what the outcomes are going to be. We're moving along stage by stage, slowly, and it's all about the negotiation process. That's going to take 2 years. So, we're really here to talk about construction. How's it going to affect construction? The Procurement Management Index in August was 49.2, the measurement of how much materials and so on have been purchased. The following month, it went up to 52.3, and that doesn't look like it's that significant, just going up 3.1 points. But actually, what it means is that anything above 50 on their scale indicates expansion. So after the Brexit vote, the construction industry was on the up, it was expanding, and has continued to do so. That's come from government information. There's resilience in the housing market. That's kept the construction marketplace resilient. There's an upturn in civil engineering projects in the back of the last year in the UK. Companies from overseas, Nissan said they're going to carry on new builds in Sunderland. Lots of talk about companies disappearing and going off to different places. Nissan have invested lots of money in their plant in Sunderland. They're going to start to build 2 models. Although we did hear this morning from John O'Regan that he's had lots of inquiries from companies wanting to come to set up offices in Ireland. And why wouldn't they? It's a nice country. It probably works. It's another office set up. You're outside the EU. In the UK, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. Maybe they're just hedging their bets. Maybe when all the negotiations are done, they set up offices here and then pull back out again. We all believed back in 2007 that the economy was flying. It was flying in the UK. It was flying over here. And I, for one, would have been the first to take a project that was offered from Lehman Brothers in the City of London. But look what happened to them. Big American bank. And so the story goes, behind the Chinese walls, is that the Americans decided to let Lehman Bank fall rather than let AIG, which is the American insurance group, fall, because that would have caused more problems. So Lehman Bank went in the UK and around the world, and of course they lost a couple of their mortgage brokers as well in the USA along the way. That bank there has just bought into Arm Holdings for $24 billion. They're going to double their staffing in 5 years. That's a real success story of the ex-government business. It's been a real success story. GlaxoSmithKline announced that they're going to put £275 million investment in. But why am I telling you about these three? Well, every time one of these companies wants to do something else with their business, doubling the staff in 5 years' time, £275 million, there's construction involved. Remodelling, new buildings. Because whatever you do on a daily basis in the construction world, you affect the lives of people you'll never meet. Happens every day. All of us do it. Because we build the economy. We build a civilised society. That's what we do in our day jobs. We don't see the end users mainly. So every time there's a business like these that are saying, I'm going to do something with my business, there'll be somebody just behind who's going to do some remodelling or new building for them. as long as they stick to their promises, of course. Government said they're going to put more public funding in for housing. About time. We heard this morning that the underinvestment you've had in this country is long overdue. Government's much the same in the UK. They always come in after the event. They'd always rush up with a lorry load of umbrellas just after the rain stopped and the storms passed. It's what governments do. They're always after the event. The real change makers are sitting in this room, people who are prepared to go out and do the work, the entrepreneurs that are out there to take the risks. We're the people that make the difference, not the governments, because the governments tend to follow. They go in and sort out the legislation, but they're following the lead of what the rest of us are doing. Because the economy thrives on the basis of how much money individuals like us make for the tax coffers. The government doesn't make it. They tidy up the paperwork back in Central. McDonald's, everybody's favourite burger. They announced 5,000 new jobs. They won't all get into the existing burger joints. They're going to have to make new ones. There's more work to come there. More money, says the UK government, available for infrastructure. Same story you heard this morning for Irish infrastructure. In December, there was a 1 month doubling of input. Sorry, I've got a bit of a dodgy typo there. Doubling of 1.8% against a prediction of 1%. That's nearly double what was predicted in terms of construction output. How did they get it so wrong? Yeah, we're flying. It's moving forward. It's not perfect. It's not where we want to be, but it is moving better than the naysayers have suggested. So, I don't know where you are in this process so far, but I am. I'm confused about where this is going to lead. I still can't quite see the light at the end of this tunnel. I don't quite understand where we're going to end up, because I don't think I've had all the facts put in front of me. But I mentioned this earlier on. 25% of London and South East are from the EU. Mention that. That I didn't mention. There's nowhere near enough skilled tradesmen available in the UK. Most of our tradesmen come from Eastern Europe now. We've stopped training. Some way back when Tony Blair was our Prime Minister, he and his government decided that everybody should have a degree. Great idea, until someone realised that actually anybody who works with their hands doesn't need a degree. They need proper training, proper skills to be able to assist those that do have degrees. And those who've got degrees can't manage because there's nobody left to manage. I thought I heard this morning that you've got a 15 to 20% construction growth. There's more jobs available than there are applicants, and jobs up to €45,000 per annum. Doesn't seem like a bad market to be in. But not enough people to go around. There's not enough people in Ireland to go around. And yet, the stories you read in the papers here, listen to the news, it's all doom and gloom. But you've got an economy here that's crying out for skilled people. Don't quite understand it. It does leave me confused here, and it's the same in the UK. The shortage of quality technical staff. Well, I heard that this morning. That was a bit of a shock to me. Student retention's a problem. If there's a good job on offer that's worth €45,000 and people don't want to stay and finish a degree, I don't get that. I don't quite know what the problem is. Whether it's living away from home, from the mammy, or I don't know what it is, but I'm not getting it. So again, I'm confused. But, and there are some buts in this process. You know, before we move on to actually, let me go back. Before we move on to the but, everything I heard here today so far has been positive about the industry, construction industry in particular, in this country. And you should be mightily proud of where you are and where you're going, because from where you've come from, it was quite a bit of a disaster, really. I've been coming to this island for well over 40 years now. I go regularly to on the borders of Meath and Cavan, and driving through the countryside and seeing half-built premises, and driving through cities and seeing half-built premises with rusty scaffolding was a real sadness for somebody like me who's sort of lived and breathed construction. That's not where you are now, and that's not where your future is. It's really moving forward at some great pace. But there are significant risks out there still. With all this growth, and all these people still coming in from the EU, and they don't quite know what the background of the local culture is, there's an opportunity for unscrupulous people and unethical behaviour to kick into modern slavery. What do I mean by that? I mean when somebody is getting paid £10 an hour for providing labour, and this is just an example, and they're paying their workforce £5 an hour, under what we consider to be the minimum wage in the UK. I don't know if there's a minimum wage here in Ireland, but certainly in the UK there's a minimum wage and it isn't £5. It's a lot more than that. And yet there are a lot of people out there who are still playing this game of keeping them tight with their money. And of course that captures people, because they can't afford to save enough to get the fare home. They have to carry on working. They get hooked into a cycle for the next week's wages. So the supply chain needs to be regularly checked. And with all this growth, and there's not enough people around, then somebody says, well, I can get you that labour, I can make that work, then they need to be checked to make sure that what they're providing is bona fide labour. They're paying their people properly, and they're looking after their people properly. Right now, we're going through the pros of creating a workplace pension. So by the end of this year, everybody who's in work other than one-man bands should have a workplace pension where they contribute and their employers contribute. That'll be an interesting term to make sure that our supply chains are doing that. But of course, those of us in the construction industry would have known about people who the big hoo-ha about the people who got killed in Qatar, working on the football stadiums, and the conditions they had out there. I was fortunate enough to go out there a couple of years ago and visit some of the work camps that they have for Qatari Rail employees, and they were pretty good, but I dare say we were shown the better ones. Canteen facilities were good, recreational facilities were good in the camps. The more senior you were, the lot more space you had, but there were showers available, communal toilets. The whole thing was pretty well set up. But I'm sure there was other camps around that were nowhere near as good, nowhere near as smart. And all of that process, on the face of it, looked good until you sat down next to a Qatari who was part of the royal family, and I was chatting to him, and he said the fact that these people's passports are taken away by their labour masters and stop them leaving the country, and if they need to get their passport back, they have to pay for the passport to get it back. They have to pay for an entrance fee into the country, and by the time you add up all that money and these other little add-ons they have to pay, they have to work for something like a 12 months, 15 months before they earn any wages to repay what the company has paid to bring them into the country, irrespective of the fact they've paid to come in as well. So they've got a double whammy there. They've been hit twice. And it's an area really that, you know, collectively we shouldn't allow to go on. We made big representations when I was part of the CIOB delegation out there about how unfair it was. And the Qatari I spoke to said, well, you wouldn't have this if it was all these people coming into your country. We control them. We don't have them running around doing what they like here. Different culture, different ethical behaviour. But it certainly isn't right according to the sort of moral code that we use in the West. So modern slavery exists, certainly out in the Middle East and further afield, but it's a lot closer to home than we like to think. And I know in the UK that it does exist and it has been uncovered. And it's got to be stamped out. It's a disgrace in this modern world that people are captured and they can't go where they want because someone's taken their passport away. Not legally, they've had it illegally removed from them and they've had to pay for the privilege. Workers' welfare, well, I touched on that a little bit about how, you know, in Qatar they provided them good facilities, but the reality is, in a lot of places still, the level of workers' welfare really needs to be graded up to a point that's as good as in any office. Because for us to obtain good quality products in terms of final buildings, you should really start off with good quality site setups, good quality welfare facilities, because if it's wrong there, it's certainly going to be wrong when it gets out on site, in my view. And that's something that, when I was running a construction business, I always instigated. If the site loos weren't good enough, there was no point going to look at the site, because the standard was just appalling. This was mentioned earlier on this morning. Again, John O'Regan was on this, and Tom mentioned it as well, about margins will be hit as cheap labour disappears. That's if cheap labour does appear. It could be that when it's really moving on, there'll be people say, actually, I can get you that labour, I can get it for you at a decent price. But I think that's definitely on its way. It's certainly happened in the UK. If you've got an expansion on the way now and people have moved, I heard 18,000 people left this country to go and work elsewhere, and they're slowly coming back, Tom said, but in the last 18 months you've had 18,000 new jobs created in the industry, so you're balancing that out, so if people come back, you'll have more than enough people to do it, but it will be a problem, and there's no doubt. 8.5% I think was on John O'Regan's pitch this morning. That's a significant jump in anybody's margin. So I've whizzed through that a bit quickly, primarily because we're running behind time and I've got to get back to Dublin, I'm afraid. But has anybody got any questions? Good. Because you're all as confused as I am. Great. Sorry? No. But I got to tell you, my kids have applied for theirs. Yeah. Yeah, that was the first thing they did the day after. Yeah. Can I have my birth certificate, Mum? I'm going down to the Irish Embassy. Yeah, it's a confusing time, but from a construction perspective, I think you haven't got anything to worry about here, the way it's going at the moment. You know, those graphs are showing that life's on the up. There's not enough people here, so you'll all be in demand when you finish your degrees. You know what price to ask for as soon as you walk out of the institute. It's 45 grand and up. You can't fail. It was just mentioned this morning by the TD, the world's your oyster. Thank you.